No matter what now that we have had a prayer to open the occasion, allow me to say my respects to His Majesty the King, the Right Honorable the Prime Minister, His Majesty's government, leaders of political parties, heads of nations and members of the diplomatic corps and the international organizations resident in our country, members of the University Council, members of the senior management team of the university, colleagues from the university, and all of you compatriots. It's a great pleasure for me to welcome you this evening on behalf of our esteemed university for this engagement we shall be enjoying. It is generally accepted that elections are the only way acceptable in a civilized society for the selection or even care appointment of leaders who must lead the nation. In convening this meeting, as the National University of Lesotho, we mean to reaffirm our belief in the democratic process. By the way, since 1993, for every one of the elections that we have had in the country, the National University of Lesotho has always provided a platform for contesting political parties to market themselves, to test their plans, and of course to interact with one of the most important formation in the nation. And that formation is what colloquially is often called the chartering class. That is the intelligentsia. And many young people that will be continuing their studies at the university. It is only natural, therefore, that given that constituency that is equipped with the mental tools of interacting, questioning, testing ideas, that we do provide such platform. And we hope in so doing we make our modest contribution to the enrichment of the democratic culture in our society. The initial plan this year was to invite individual parties to come onto the main campus, the Roma campus, to go and present their plans and interact with the community out there. But as you and I know, we have had a state of unrest on campus, and therefore we had to put on hold that arrangement. We then decided when things had calmed down and order had come back to change the format somewhat by convening this particular meeting, in particular because on the main campus we have put a very rigorous recovery plan for the lost teaching and learning period, and we did not want to disrupt that process. And that is why we decided to have these instructions here. Now, we invited 5 political parties, and today, just about lunch, I met some competitors who said, how did you choose the parties? Because they are about 30 parties registered with the IEC in the country. You can always guess what I said. I said we sought consultation of our Sangoma. The truth, though, is that we looked at 2 criteria. One, the outcome of 2015 elections, and we thought that gave us an indication of who the principal parties are. We also did a little bit, not exactly scientific, scan of the environment to determine of those newly emerging parties who seemed to command higher visibility. And it was on the basis of that we invited the parties. Initially, the parties that had been invited in no particular order were the DC, the ABC, the LCD, the BNP, and the AD. But we got advice that the DC was not going to be participating for a number of reasons. And so we looked around and said, who is the new kid on the block? And that's how Mick made it. And so we still have a full complement of 5 parties that will be participating in this event. I just want to thank the parties for accepting the invitation, particularly at this point in time, because people are very hectic campaigning in their constituencies, and to find time to come and spend with a hall which is not even full yet, that is not exactly an optimal investment of energy. So we appreciate that they spent the time to want to come and talk to us. The arrangement is in the following manner. We have on my right hand, not that they are ideologically right, experts from the university, each one of whom is handling one question that will be put to the panel on my left side. Again, not that they are left, as far as I'm aware. And then all of the parties will talk to the issue until it has been exhausted, and then another expert will handle his or her own issue for
introductory remarks and the welcoming remarks, where you explain the rationale and the justification for this evening's political debate. I've already been introduced. My name is Ibai Santu, and I've been asked to moderate and facilitate this evening's discussions. So, Excellencies, esteemed party representatives, guests from within and outside Lesotho, ladies and gentlemen, I look forward to your cooperation to make sure that this evening succeeds. Now, I'll briefly go through the rules of engagement that the Vice Chancellor has already referred to, but provide a brief context, very brief. In general consensus, I think, that Lesotho is at a crossroads. And meaning that Lesotho, if they need to predict their future, they have to create it. The best way of predicting the future is to create it now. Between 2012 and 2017, we have had 3 national elections costing close to 1 billion, and society rightfully wants to do a cost-benefit exercise, and citizens have high expectations about the return of that investment for society. Generally speaking, going forward, there is consensus that there should be good governance performance and service delivery, inclusive growth, social cohesion, sustainable development, and human security. So broadly speaking, that's what we mean when we say we're at a crossroads. Having said that, I'm sure we share that interpretation of the current context. On our process this evening, we are using English because we have a diversity of guests and participants tonight. So you will bear with us. English will be our medium. But if in response a party representative really feels that he needs to delve a bit into Sesotho, that's allowed. But predominantly, please bear with us for using English. 2, our time frame is tight. If you start at 6, it's 10 to 7. So we have to manage in the next 3 hours maximum to achieve our objectives. So as we are done latest by 10 p.m. it's winter after all. The process is in 2 phases. Panelists, the experts whom I will introduce in a moment, and their themes, will lead the first 1.5 hours. And then the second phase will be question and answers from the floor. So as you can have an opportunity to engage with our esteemed political party representatives. 5 themes have been identified, and I would like to introduce the theme and the experts who will put the question. The question will be put by the expert based on what the theme entails. Each of the delegates of the party representatives will respond to that theme question. The idea is that 5 minutes will be devoted to a response, so as the overall response of the 5 political parties will take maximum 30 minutes in the interest of time. Then we move on to the next theme. So we have more or less plus minus 30 minutes for the question. Okay, having done that, please put your cell phones on silent, or better still, switch them off, so as you should not be unduly disturbed by that. Now, Professor Sebo Mbuku will lead us on education. Dr. Lititi, this is Professor Sebo Mbuku. Will lead us on economy and unemployment issues. The rule of law in the democracy. Professor Gabba will lead us on service delivery and local governance issues. And Mrs. Mabeta will lead us on the professionalism in the public service. Thank you. Those are expert panelists. And we'll move in the order in which we have narrated those themes. Now, without wasting any more time, I would like the prepare to put your question. The expert is allowed to make a short introduction and then to put the question, just to provide the context for the question. If he feels that the response was not good, he has a follow-up opportunity. Having said that, over to you.
Thank you very much, Master of Ceremony. Men, wanted to start with, let me welcome you to this theme on education, specifically focusing on tertiary education. This is going to be a hard talk, but I don't think it will be as hard as Stephen Saka's BBC talk. I'll go a little bit deep though. You will agree with me that the higher education subsector is completely neglected. According to the Council on Higher Education report on state of higher education in Lesotho of 2012, we have 13 higher education institutions in Lesotho. But it is clear that we have never had a clear plan of developing this subsector. Consequently, institutions have grown significantly poorer every year, annually, in terms of the infrastructure. We see a shortage of lecture rooms, laboratories, libraries. At NUL, Lesotho Polytechnic, and Lesotho College of Education. At the same time, we note a burgeoning number of students in these institutions who cannot be well accommodated. Not to mention LAC, Lesotho Agricultural College, which is completely run down. There has never been a strategic development plan for higher education, resulting in severe structural limitations. The whole tertiary sector of about 15 institutions currently is run by one person, the Chief Education Officer tertiary. And the Ministry of Education really can be said to be focused primarily on basic education. It is not surprising, therefore, that you see in most of the institutions that we have, or in general, we note that the majority of our youth are failing to have access to education, to higher education, and only 6.2% of our entire youth in the country have attained tertiary education. The majority of youth qualify for admission at tertiary institutions are excluded due to lack of NMDS sponsorship. And we are currently lately seeing riots and arrests, all characterizing our institutions of higher learning. Not to mention that it is clear that we are losing a competitive edge in the region. As is evidenced by the current intake in our institutions of foreign students, there is less than 1% of foreign students enrolled in higher education institutions. And this could simply be attributed to poor funding. For example, at Anywhere, this is my last point here about the scenario now, or the situation. At Anywhere currently, we know that the funding dropped from 132 million in 2008-2009 to a low of 109 million this academic year. Now my question is, how does your party envision the development of public tertiary education? And I'm particularly here saying public because we also have private tertiary institutions. How does your party envision the development of public tertiary education in advancing manpower skills development in Lesotho? And how do you plan to achieve that vision? And how do you plan to achieve that vision? Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much. I hope the question is clear. While our esteemed representatives are thinking about the question, it just occurred to me that the vices that I had mentioned, parties, who are representing the party. The roving microphone. ABC, please, names and positions if you want in the party. I'm just going down my list. ABC.
My name?
Name.
Okay. My name is Maurice Majoro. I'm now standing in Tanzania, so I'm an aspirant to be a member of the 10th Parliament. Of course, there are those that already think I'm in. But we'll still wait for June 3 anyway.
No, we have more.
No, I didn't understand the words.
Sure.
I'm Samyan Tsege. I'm the Secretary General of World Basotho Convention. I'm also standing somewhere towards the Northern Sigwari constituency.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. My name is Lebohan Putanyama. I am from TY number 24. That's where I'm standing under the flag of the Lesotho Congress for Democracy. I am Minister of Mining in the current coalition government.
Thank you. My name is João Malapo. I'm the Deputy Leader of the Basotho National Party. I am also the party's candidate in the constituency of Maputo number 15.
First of all, let me say how happy I am to stand here in front of you today. My name is Mokgeseng Reggie Tekateka. I'm the Secretary General of the Basotho National Party. At this point, I'm not running for office. I'm sure you'll all agree that there's a lot of good work still to be done in other places. Thank you.
Thank you so much. From the Alliance of Democrats, this is Mokhere Mulitani, Secretary General, a candidate for 80, but in number 45. Thank you so much.
I am Mokoto Fine, Treasurer in the AD, running for office for Mariama's constituency. I know many of you in here don't even know where to go from here to Mariama's.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Heban Tida Mosena. I'm the Communications and Marketing Secretary in the Movement for Economic Change political party. I'm also a candidate for the Khubezwana constituency. Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Sampo Mushroshwe. I come from Movement for Economic Change. I'm a candidate at Berea number 27. I'm the Public Relations Officer as well in the National Executive Committee.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you. We now know who's here for the 5 parties. This also give you an opportunity to think about the question.
It's not entirely from an independent institution. You have an interest in this question, and so we will take that into account in our response. But looking at education broadly, and then narrowing on tertiary education, we cannot separate tertiary education from education in general. And we cannot look forward to solutions without necessarily looking at the diagnostic of what is wrong. And what is wrong in Lesotho's education is as broad as possible. It starts at the very beginning of the journey for education. Our education has several problems, one of them being it's inaccessible to everyone. There is a lot of inequality. And what we see, when we see kids at school, there are still those that are not able to make it to school, even when education is free, even when it is compulsory. And since independence, the problem afflicting primary education were both inequality as well as access. By introduction of free primary education, we try to respond to the issue of access, liberalize access, maybe let everybody have a chance at education. But in doing so, we do not also address the issue of quality. And in fact, by broadening the classes, we made quality, we worsen the quality. So that's one. Inequality, as well as low quality of education, and add more people in there, then the quality suffers. Go to secondary school, so you get a quality issue transitioning from the lower levels into secondary. And in there is even more restriction because fees are still being paid. But you bring people that are bringing with them a quality challenged capacity into secondary school. Add to that an accelerating problem or incident of access as well. So there's even fewer people at secondary school. And then carry them to tertiary. So even there are still a few thousands as opposed, so if you start at say 200,000 at primary, you end up with a few thousands at tertiary. You can see how that scale is narrowing. But at tertiary education, pretty much the studies show that those people that make it there are already from privileged families. because the economic and welfare system in Lesotho is such that those that are most disadvantaged fall off in the early years, and they never have some minister or know a minister to visit and to ensure that manpower can grant a scholarship. Another really powerful issue, and now focusing on tertiary education, is relevance. Universities have curriculum that is developed within the universities, but not necessarily in conjunction with those people that are going to hire the skills from universities. So we know this because we do consultations with universities, with tertiary schools here in Lesotho. And of course, in our discussions, institutions admit that there's no formalized way of consulting with employers. We have graduates that are looking for jobs, thousands of them. We also have jobs, but that are mismatched almost totally with the skills that are being acquired. So relevance is also a critical issue that we have. Now, in seeking solutions, we need to look very deeply at education as a whole. Education is a right, is a benefit, not only because knowledge is good to have, but also because it gives you a fighting chance in securing a livelihood. So we must address it for its own sake, for knowledge, but also for securing a livelihood. And that means you cannot just focus on tertiary education. You need to go back at the beginning and begin to build not only access, but also quality. We have tried to address issues of access, but we have not addressed quality. In fact, we have made quality well. So we need to go back and now rewrite the script on how we can also address quality, because it is better educated youngsters coming through the chain that will make the university more relevant and more able. The graduates out of now will be of a higher quality. If I'm told I have 3 minutes now to go. So what we need to do is transform and address both access, but also address quality. Bring universities and other tertiary institutions in contact with employers and to begin to develop a dialogue that will then involve and impact the curricula at universities. But it is not just employers, it is of course parents. Parents should have an interest in what is being trained. So the approach is to look at it, set up a wider dialogue between parents, employers, and trainers, and get a plan that moves from primary, secondary, into tertiary education. I thank you, sir.
Thank you. We have taken care of some of the key issues that have come up with regard to education. How have we done? Party delegates try to stick within their 5 minutes. We assume you are playing to your strengths. So if you want to share the 5 minutes between the two of you, please do so. But it's difficult to give you more than 5 minutes. Otherwise, we are almost within the 30 minutes per theme. And so we want to move on to the next theme, where issues of the economy and employment and employment will be put by Dr.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, honorable panel. I would like to put before you the following facts about the city economy. These are 7 facts. Over the past decades, economic growth in Lesotho has not been increasing and has not created jobs for everyone in society. Since 2012, elections, economic growth has been declining from 4% to less than 2.5% over this period of in and out elections. Second point, poverty has increased to an extent that today more than 57% of the population lives below poverty line. The third fact, inequality is huge, as measured by Gini coefficient of 0.4%, which places this economy among the top 10 topmost unequal society in the world. The fourth fact, growth has been driven by government, and this model is not sustainable in light of declining South and other international megaheads and shocks. The fifth fact, private sector makes less than 10% of GDP in this country. The sixth fact, unemployment has worsened, in particular among the youth. It is now estimated at about 40% of the total labor force, which is quite high by any international standards. The last fact, informality is rising in the world of work. Informality is rising in the world of work. Now, I put to you that the economy needs to grow. It needs to grow by at least 10% per year to reduce these disturbing effects. The question is, how does your political party intend to transform this economy into a sustainable job-creating economy that we can all be proud of? In other words, can you tell the audience what strategies your political party, if voted in power, will put in place to create jobs as we look forward into the next second 50 years of independence?
Thank you very much for this engaging question, Professor. It's a very elaborate and powerful question. Let's see if we can try to wrap it up from the point of view of our party. As indicated earlier, my name is Mwegeti Majoro, and I am here to represent all Basotho Convention for the Basotho. We will hear many statements about what to do about the economy of Lesotho, and we do this every few years when we campaign. But it's going to be statements that don't often go to the fundamentals of what is wrong with the economy of Lesotho, and we need to look at this quite carefully. A few years ago, we were looking at strategies of growing this economy to 7 to 10%. The assumption there was that the basics are in place, and those basics are political stability, peace, and justice. Those assumptions and basics where there is macroeconomic stability. So we assumed those are where, and then we started working in the world of creating jobs. World of creating jobs by the private sector. Since 2014, it has become clear that those assumptions were not correct. Political stability has accelerated. Justice is disappearing. There is no peace. Threats abound, lies abound. So the fundamentals, you cannot build an economy unless you have peace. The economy is built. The economy is built and is transacted by the agents in society, those that create jobs and those that buy from the work that has been created or from the products that have been created by the economy. When there is uncertainty, when we no longer have peace, then those agents will not take the right decisions to invest or to consume. When there is uncertainty, consumers will try to hold back money in their pockets. They will not want to spend it. Business will hold back. They will not want to invest it. The immediate problem will be those that are already employed, people will release them. And we know that this economy has been shedding jobs in the last few years. And that goes fundamentally to the fact that we don't have political stability, and we cannot build an economy without political stability. The second thing is a fundamental, macroeconomic stability. We know that for many years now we've been talking about the risks that Lesotho faces in depending too much on SACCU. More critically, you should know that all the domestic taxes that Lesotho collects are equivalent to its wage bill. So VAT and the income tax that we collect here are just going to pay the wage bill. The wage bill, sometimes we call it the Zimbabweanization of the Lesotho economy. This is where the wage bill is close to the entire budget, and that is a crisis that is coming. So unless we deal with the wage bill, what is happening? The wage bill is being funded by taking the goods and services away. If you take goods and services away, you make human productivity, you reduce human productivity or labor productivity. So when you're looking at a crisis there, those are the fundamentals that we will have to fix first. Moving forward, the next step we intend to take is provided we can fix those. So the first order of business is to fix political stability and macroeconomic stability. The second then is to strive a dialogue with business, and many of you will know we have already started doing that as ABC. Jobs are going to be created by the private sector and not government. Government never creates any jobs. Government kills jobs. But as the professor already indicated, the private sector accounts for only 10% of jobs in Lesotho. It has to be all the jobs in Lesotho. So we say private sector jobs, but we do something else. Why don't we, for the first time, get the private sector to lead in terms of how it can create those jobs, and government to then follow what the private sector says it wants? This is not a dream. Many of you will know what is called Malaysia Big Fast Results, right? That's a dialogue between business and government. And what business does is, we can give you 10% growth in the economy, 10,000 jobs, but you need to do this. That dialogue, and business telling government you need to do this, that is what is called a national plan. A national plan should not be for government to implement. It's for the private sector to implement to create jobs. That's the line we are going to take as ABC. Jobs are coming.
Once again, big issues, time limited. Certainly. The rule of law in a democracy. That has come up quite a lot already. So without wasting any time,
thank you very much, Program Director Limbe. Let's have the conversation about democracy and the rule of law within this particular context. Some of the long-standing weaknesses of Lesotho's democracy are: one, weak and sometimes lack of institutions of democracy, sometimes called oversight institutions. where we have these institutions like the Ombudsman, the DCEO, and others, they have serious structural and resources limitations to the extent of rendering them virtually ineffectual. Another challenge is the decline in the rule of law as laid bare by the Senate Commission of Inquiry and political interference with the judiciary as typified by the turnover at the office of the President of the Court of Appeal. Since 2012, we have seen not less than 3 occupants in this office. This is unusual by any international standards. The question now, what is the vision of your party about strengthening and establishment of oversight institutions, enhancing rule of law, and the independence of the judiciary? The question, I'm told to repeat it, what is the vision of your political party about strengthening and establishment, where we don't have them like the Human Rights Commission, of these oversight institutions, enhancing rule of law, and the independence of the judiciary within the context that we have laid?
Thank you. Question is clear now. ABC?
I touched on this topic earlier because I'm reminded to say that I'm Legati Majoro. I'm representing Oba Social Convention. By the way, on June 3, I'm looking for you to vote for me. So you make sure that you do that, whichever party you come from, because there's now need to fix this reform that failed to take place. It's for the next 50 years. The previous 50 years is lost 50 years. We just started the next 50 years, but we started on a quicksand foundation. For the next 50 years, if we start like this, we are in serious trouble. So we know the institutions have collapsed or are collapsing and are systematically being taken apart. Parliament, the leader of the House is from the executive. The 3 arms. But one person, powerful person from one arm is actually leading Parliament. That ought to be odd. How come we even figure that is very odd? That must stop. Parliament must run its own business, and the executive must go in there to seek approval from Parliament. Not to direct Parliament. You can trump up charges about not filing taxes on time. And you follow this process, you hire some highly paid foreigners, and you bring them in, and they cook up this thing until to the final end. And we say that that was due process. This is Lesotho constitutionalism, and Lesotho has now collapsed. Now we need to refix it. And after June 3, we need to put a structure that can fix that. We want, as ABC, to now entrench power sharing. What does that mean? It means for every decision there must be checks and balances. Never again should a Prime Minister originate the recruitment of a commander of the force and see it all the way through. Never again should the Prime Minister originate the recruitment of an appeal court judge and see it all the way through. In the type of checks and balances model we are looking at, yes, the Prime Minister can originate, but the hiring must be done by Parliament. So a commander must go and tell us in open interview, that will be possible. But it's just him and the Prime Minister. Never getting together, isn't it? But we'll never get to know that. And so we have this buddy, I'll cover your back. And we have this this is the collapse of constitutionalism. So what we are going to do, for appointments in the judiciary, for appointments in commissions, for appointments of senior officials in state-owned companies, those should be originated by the executive, but the hiring must be done by Parliament in full view. A few months ago, my view was, yes, this is, maybe if the government changes, we can still work with the judiciary. But some of the decisions now are very worrisome. You have a judge, or you have a decision that concludes that perhaps this soldier may not have understood what I decided. That was a cop-out. You know that's worrisome because there was fear in that judge. You have 5 judges plainly reading, plain English, proceeding and preceding, and they are struggling to know the difference between the two. 5 of them. 5. So, for the judiciary, perhaps we need to go to the KM model, take it apart and bring it all together, all with qualifications, all hired in public, through hearings, perhaps in Parliament. The institutions, the 3 institutions must now genuinely be separate and independent, and we must now legislate and entrench this separateness and checks and balances. A few things about institutions. The message about institutions is that we must now strengthen all of them and create new ones. But one of the clever things that I think we need to do, and that we are planning to do as ABC, is legislate a code of conduct for procurement, for ministers. Essentially, get out of procurement. Legislate a code of conduct for procurement for principal sectors. Get out of that thing and let the teams do their work. Improve all the institutions. Watch out.
The 4th theme, which will combine with the 5th theme, both for time management purposes and for efficiency. Civic level and local governance. As you, Professor Kapa will do the introduction and pose the question. Then professionals in the public service, Peter will do the intro and pose the questions. Then those combined questions, the response to them.
Thank you very much, Program Director. My theme deals with local government and service delivery, where I want to look at 3 aspects. One is the structure of the local government system, and then capacity and autonomy. By way of providing context, I want to highlight the following fact. The first is that we have a local government system composed of 4 levels currently, from 3 that we had previously. The total number of local councils we had before the current one was 139 countrywide. And then currently we have 86 of them. That is the decrease of about 53 or 62%. That's one thing. The second thing has to do with the bigger purpose of whether Lesotho being a local state that it is. Do we really need to localize the local? And I move on to other facts. Research indicates that these structures have not been effective in terms of providing services to Lesotho because of 2 issues: lack of autonomy and lack of capacity. And they depend entirely on intergovernmental transfers. They cannot generate their own revenue. The government's own document that I saw says they generate just about 5,000 malut a year, which is equivalent to the allowance of 1 councillor per month. Now, my questions will be, does this structure as it is, in the view of our parties represented here, really reflect what Lesotho needs? Does Lesotho need this elaborate structure of local government? And if so, or if not, what is it that these parties will do in terms of this structure so that local government becomes an effective instrument for service delivery in Lesotho? The second part of that question is, what concrete plans do these parties now represented here have to capacitate and empower this institution so that they can become effective in providing services to us?
Thank you very much. All the questions are clear.
Thank you very much for this, ladies and gentlemen. I want to start from the premise that my question is based on the realization that all these aspects that have been discussed here depend on a civil service that is competent, professional, passionate. That is which serves the government of the day. Before I ask my question, let me just give a few pointers by way of creating a perspective or a context. One is that we know that the civil service of Lesotho is the largest employer and it employs professionals. Secondly, we know that as a civil service, it is a political creation. Naturally, it is a political creation. But we also know that it is protected by public administration principles so that we promote professionalism and political neutrality. At the moment, there's evidence based on research, based on observations, that the public service in Lesotho is highly politicized. It's not professional, or it's professional, but to a very small extent. It's noted that this politicization has a historical, it has moved historically. It started after independence with the first government of the BNP. It's a fact. For political expediencies, it was then introduced. Patronage and nepotism practices were introduced. However, it never stopped. It has escalated to a level now that it's rife and it's so institutionalized. It has become a culture that is entrenched even in the laws of the country. For example, there are laws like, if I can give an example, Public Service Order of 1970, Public Service Act of 1995, Public Service Act of 2005, the Lesotho Defense Force Act of 1996, etc., etc. Those are just examples to show how entrenched their politicization is. Now, it's argued also by some writers and observers that, in fact, the civil service has been captured by politicians. Has been captured by politicians to drive their own interests. The interest of controlling government, institutions of government, and civil servants and the whole system. But also at the same time ensuring that they drive their political party patronage interests. Now, this has created a situation where we have, for example, a very weak government system, poor service delivery, low morale, corruption, political instability, overstuffed civil service, and also a reduction in the confidence that the citizens have in the public service. So, having created that perspective, my question is to the political parties. What are the plans of political parties to instill, promote, and strengthen professionalism, and therefore depoliticize the public service to enable it to play its vital role of being responsive to the development of the country and to the citizens' needs? Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Mwenyezi Majoro Lacha.
The moderator, let me start by first seeking protection.
From your neighbor.
My neighbor on my left represents LCD and DC. He has the agreement in front of him. Now, here's the protection I'm seeking. He is representing a political party, not government. So I would like to speak about government without necessarily getting a pushback from him. Because government is separate from this discussion today, isn't it?
You are protected.
Let me on decentralization, let me start with an example. A few years ago, I was principal secretary and we had a sort of this back and forth with Ministry of Local Government over a council that had used its grant to build a VIP at the bus stop, many kilometers away from the village. The central government, Ministry of Local Government, felt that that was wasting money. But the community said that there's a reason we are doing it. We don't know when the bus is coming, we are there 3-4 hours and there's no toilet. and we know what we're doing. That speaks to the concept of local government called subsidiarity. The principle behind local government is subsidiarity. Services must be delivered by the people closest to where there is need. We spoke about starting with 139 councils, then 89 councils. Then the decentralization policy is looking to now go to 69. I think it was 69 to 69. So since 2005, we are undergoing experimentation. We haven't figured out what is the optimum number of councils we should have. We need to deploy a little bit of intelligence. Let's get the right number of councils and then legislate that. We passed a policy in 2014 called the decentralization policy. It wasn't in 2016, it was in 2014. You were not there, we were there. Here's the crisis. The text and the background information in the document simply says, this is not local government. You must stop this, you must develop a new model. So we have been experimenting since 2005. It's not the right model. Notice also, since inception of local government in the Sudan, there's only been under 2 ministers. Just 2. If there was a mistake, that mistake continues. So it's critical that we move away from the old local government model to a local government model that devolves power, that deconcentrates services so that services are delivered by the people closest to me. My story about the toilets. They knew what they wanted, but the minister Masero couldn't agree with them. It was too far from the place. We must be there. Now, there is a policy. The policy is based on the Rwanda policy. We had a Rwanda person sitting here with us, and we do this. So essentially, we went to Rwanda and picked it up, and we put it in the policy. But it should have already been implemented. Had it not been government trying to run away from local government elections. It's still running away from local government elections. Here's the problem. We are never going to get a capacitated local government structures if they are not practicing local government. Let me give you another example of how flawed local government in Lesotho is. During the campaigns now, we are told by Masero City Council that when we hold rallies, we must pay money to Masero City Council. So when we did our rally at FIFA, we have to pay 1,500 to Masero City Council because the police demanded it in order to give us a payment. So we have to pay. I think MEC at some other point has had to pay or is looking to pay 5,000 from what I've heard. Masero parties are asked by Masero City Council to pay this amount of money. So we spoke to councillors. Is this your decision? They said staff came to make proposals. We rejected the proposals. The proposals were very poorly written, so we rejected them. With the, how then is it being implemented? It is being implemented by the town clerk. How can the town clerk implement this? Well, the town clerk tells us that if you don't authorize it, it can be authorized by the minister. These are two separate governments. The minister in the central government is controlling what is happening in local government. Therefore, there is local government except in names and offices that people are hiring, isn't it? But we want to put that to a stop. As soon as U3 passes, we are going to move very quickly in putting a new structure of local government and deconcentrating and moving forward. Two things that we need to work that are not addressed by the current framework. Even under the new policy, we need to look at that. Chieftainship, we are pretending that chieftainship is not affecting our lives. So we have a situation where the chief is participating ex officio in a council, and the chief has a lot of power in the village, isn't it? Why are they not fully integrated in the structure and given the due credit and respect for the role they are playing? Why not? Land. They have responsibility for land, but we are very uncertain about how we should address that. The local government authorities need to take, the national and central government and local government authorities need to take land issues head on. I'm going to move very quickly to the professionalism of the public service. I don't need to speak about it, we know it's unprofessional. The New Zealand package already does a lot and represents a lot of reforms that are needed. I just want to speak to you about two. One, we need to move from principal secretary to permanent secretary. That is the loophole for politicization. This is how governments politicize the civil service. That top guy, minister should find him there and leave him there. He must be an expert, we should find him there and leave him there. But by now bringing party warriors, the guy, we are fighting for a position with this guy. I walk in as a minister, he walks in as a PS. We divide government ministries so that we can go back to campaigning again. These are politicians on top of the structure. We need to move from principal secretary to permanent secretary. Second point, we need to take the Public Service Commission apart. It must be accountable to Parliament, and it must oversee the professionalism of the public service. All the commissioners must be appointed by Parliament, it must account to Parliament, but it must oversee the hiring, the independent hiring and professionalism of principal secretaries and the rest of the public service. Bacha.
This brings us to the end of the first phase. I know it's been a marathon.
You are very stimulated, but you are restless. So, we should probably have, I don't want to stop the flow, a short 5 minutes comfort break, just to shake up a bit, and then come back in 5 minutes. You don't have to leave the room. So as we then prepare for the second phase where you will have opportunity to ask questions.